Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. Today, I'm joined by Jonathan Smalley. He's the founder over at Yaguara. Jonathan, welcome to the show. How's it going today, man?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, man. We're actually, I love interviewing people here in Colorado, but you're not in Colorado today. So I'm doing my normal thing, interviewing guests across time zones. But either way, thank you for making time for the episode today. We're going to be talking about empowering your team with OKRs, ways that you can do it effectively, ways that you can do goal setting to avoid some of the pitfalls that you and I were just riffing on that we've seen in our own teams. Before we get into that, give listeners a little bit of context, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you and the team are up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as you said, Yaguara is based in Denver with a small office in New York, which is where I'm talking to you from right now. And Yaguara is a software platform that does kind of exactly what we're going to talk about today. It helps teams use their data better in order to hit their goals. And we're what we think about as a connected operations platform. And so for us, that means having the right data in the right place, kind of applying the right business context to it, which a big part of that is OKRs. And then the last piece of that is our intelligence layer, giving people then insights and recommendations based on what they tell our technology they're trying to achieve, so that our technology can then spit out, those good insights and recommendations so that they can make better decisions faster.
Coming up on the end of Q1, so everybody is probably in that mindset of the New Year's resolutions of all their personal productivity are kind of out the window, or like they're on version 5 by now, but getting ready for maybe that quarterly OKR session. So it's probably going to be pretty timely for folks. So let's kick off the conversation with this saying that you guys repeat around your team a lot. And you mentioned to me, I just thought, man, that sums it up really well. When you approach any sort of results system or goal setting framework, and that's this: framework over dogma. Unpack that statement for us a little bit and tell us how you guys apply it on your team.
Yeah, I think it's really easy, kind of to try to go from 0 to 60 in anything you do, like whether it's starting to work out, you try to go every day, which maybe isn't sustainable, or you start trying to measure a million different metrics, or you try to perfectly cascade your OKRs exactly as, John Doerr might subscribe. I think for us, it really just is that idea of framework over dogma of, applying some methodology to goal setting, so that we're measuring the things that, going back to the title of John Doerr's book, that we're measuring things that really matter, and we're measuring a reasonable number of those things. And so I think a really obvious example of that is when we first started Yaguara and we were first helping companies set goals. They would go from, maybe they would go into a dashboard of Google Analytics or Shopify or NetSuite or, whatever the tool might be, every quarter and look at something retroactively. And so they go from that, and all of a sudden they're going to have this ability to see live data. And they're like, holy cow, we want to measure 150 different things. And they apply, 40 different objectives with 5 key results each. And it's just and that's at a 6-person team, or maybe it's even at a 50-person team. And all of a sudden each person is being measured against and managed to 8 to 24 different things on an ongoing basis. And what we found, not only through internal data, but seeing a lot of data, there's only so many things that people can be measured to. And at the same time, that's true, businesses are also especially in times like now, incredibly dynamic. And so it's not just that you can only set, things in a cascading manner, or that you can only set goals on qualitative or on quantitative data, but you should be setting goals on the things that are meaningful to your business, no matter what those might be. And so I think that means for us, being dynamic when we work with different customer types, and just really becoming experts in what our customers are looking to deliver value to their end users in.
I like what you're saying there about using data, but using it intelligently, not trying to measure everything that matters, right? It reminds me of a conversation I had on the show just last week with James Lawrence, and we were talking specifically about marketing and about being data-driven, and how to the points where you want to apply data and measurement, yes, really hone in on those and figure out what you can measure that matters, but realize that some things, they're always going to be somewhat qualitative, like, maybe it's your podcast or other top of the funnel stuff. There are going to be things that trying to measure that by gating every single piece of content or something, you're actually going to do yourself a disservice. And I think, that's kind of data applied to marketing when it comes to running teams. Same sort of thing here. What are the things that you can drill on that do matter, but then what are the other things that it's just going to be too much work to try and measure those. It's going to be too much to try and enforce that. It's not going to have, the right sort of feeling. The other thing I know that you and I were riffing on that a lot of people seem to encounter this pitfall is not getting into a regular cadence. They kind of have this like coming from a conference rah out of their quarterly OKRs, and then they don't revisit those until later. And the 4 disciplines of execution, or 4DX, is a similar model to goal setting as OKRs. And that book talks about we're really good at seeing the lag measures. How did we do this past quarter versus looking at the leading indicators? So what's your advice, Jonathan, for folks on looking at those leading indicators and creating that cadence of accountability, that cadence of review that's just as important as those big moments of review quarterly or whatever the case is, right?
Yeah, I think going back to the first thing that we talked about is focus. Finding leading indicators, it's an incredibly important driver of any business. And the best way to do that, getting down into like, we can get really dorky into how like data is structured and like different schemas can allow you to like learn more quickly and readily from data. And so I think all that comes to like, how do we have really clear focus on what our success metrics are? Like, what are our lagging indicators? Defining those really well. And then finding a way to create that, regular cadence and check in on those. And I think like that's really what we built Yaguara around, was this idea of, setting goals is great, but it's not very effective if you only look at them every quarter, as you just said. And that's why we believe like the best way to do that is to have automatically updating goals. And whether that's done in Yaguara or not, finding a way to have a regular, I'd say minimum weekly cadence. I'd say a lot of people will drive down into like hourly, and it goes back to like, are there certain levels of granularity that show more signal than noise? I think each business is really different there. And you might find like where certain companies have seasonality, other companies have, essentially like trends based on weather, trends based on the time of day when people buy. And so I think, again, sticking to like framework over dogma, it's important to find the cadence that works for your business. Find a way to automate measuring those really, really important, success metrics. And then on each of those on a regular cadence, then you really have the ability to actually dive into what the leading indicators might be, because you can see, we talk a lot about like trends over fidelity. Data fidelity is less important than understanding like really specific data trends and understanding how data across your business is impacting each other. I think a really good example of that is kind of talking about what you're saying earlier with marketing data. Is it's really easy to look at optimizing inside of a box around something like cost per click or cost per transaction or something like that. What people have, I think, especially a lot of our customers have found over the past few years is when you just optimize without understanding what's the end goal of probably like acquiring high value customers, that just optimizing with marketing data means you're optimizing for not a very good customer, because it's someone who's going to buy very quickly and they're probably going to buy the cheapest thing on your site. And so it doesn't cost much to get them there. But when you have like the right North Star of saying like, hey, the most important thing for us is to acquire a customer who looks like this. Maybe they buy specific products. Maybe they have a certain number of what we'd say UPT, units per transaction. Then we can start looking at leading indicators and saying, hey, we're actually acquiring the best customers really efficiently, maybe not the cheapest, but the most efficiently, because we know what that North Star metric really is.
Hey everybody, Logan with Sweetfish here. You probably already know that we think you should start a podcast if you haven't already. But what if you have and you're asking these kinds of questions? How much has our podcast impacted revenue this year? How's our sales team actually leveraging the podcast content? If you can't answer these questions, you're actually not alone. This is why Casted created the very first content marketing platform made specifically for B2B podcasting. Now you can more easily search and share your audio content while getting greater visibility into the impact of your podcast. The marketing teams at Drift, Terminus, and here at Sweetfish have started using Casted to get more value out of our podcasts, and you probably can too. You can check out the product in action at casted.us/growth. That's casted.us/growth. All right, let's get back to the show.
And there's so much goodness in what you just said there. I love what you said. One of the things I wrote down as I was just taking notes as you were talking was signal versus noise. We can have tons of data. We can have data coming out of our ears, but that was really poignant to me thinking about what is a signal, what's identifying a trend, and what's just noise. What are some of the things that you guys recommend to your customers as they start to do more goal setting, build out their own specific frameworks to identify, are we measuring this and it's just noise, or are we measuring this and it's actually a really good signal for us to act on?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's something that we often boil down into what we call data utility. You know, we were talking about this a little bit before we got started of like kind of this like promise, 15 years ago was this like idea that like big data, whatever that means, was going to like answer all of our questions. And so I think people spent, an awful lot of time and money piping data from one place and then realizing like, holy cow, we have no data utility. Like the person in marketing who are asking to acquire 1,000 customers inside of a certain budget actually doesn't really isn't really informed by anything outside of what they're directly seeing through the platforms they're executing in. And so I think the thing for us again is like, what's the lowest common denominator to kind of get real data utility? And so for us, I think we think about kind of like three different things. The first being like data unification and aggregation. So that means like having obviously data from across the business in one place and then being unified. The idea of kind of like a market that's come to exist over the last 8 or so years is like a customer data platform. Like how is there a way to aggregate all the data that informs what a customer truly is? How do we have all of that in one place? And then two, I think going back to the last 2 points is what is the actual business context to that data? It's great to see a bar chart. It's really cool to see, a stacked line graph, but without the context of what that means to the business, it's incredibly, incredibly difficult to pull any real utility out of it. And so, it's in context is not just that you understand what you're trying to achieve with it, but it's also in the hands of the right person. And we think with the right aggregated and unified data, with the right context, what is this person, is it in the hands of the right person? Do they understand what they're trying to accomplish? Then that goes from like siloed or disparate data then into, like real data utility, data that can be utilized to make really meaningful business decisions. And, for us, part of the reason we're having this conversation is we think that goals are a great way of doing that. It's a great way of, I think, not only empowering users or customers with data, but also helping them understand on the softer side, like, where do I fit into the organization? What's the impact that I could have? And that's, I think, like one of the other things that we think about more broadly is, really like, how do we help work feel, this is another thing I say at the office all the time that people make fun of me for, is like, how does work become meaningful and not menial? And I think when we have these long checklists that are ambiguously tied to like a load of data that we'll look at once a quarter, it's easy for work to feel a little overwhelming and a little menial. But when we have the right data and the right context to the right person, they're not only empowered, but they can also feel impactful. And that's where we believe that kind of an army of empowered and impactful people is what creates the best organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a whole show dedicated to crafting culture because we believe that, as the old saying goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And when people are empowered, it's going to take the steps for the right culture. Speaking on that for a second, Jonathan, talking about the way people feel about the way they're being measured, the way they feel about what they're contributing. Are there some do's and don'ts or any advice that you give to folks as they set up that cadence of a review and accountability on their goals, their progress, setting up those dashboards, doing it in a way that does empower folks as opposed to feeling like, oh, this is a burden. Okay, this new framework is coming down on top of you. Any suggestions in rolling out any sort of goal setting system, whether it's a new platform or just a framework that they're testing kind of offline. As we wrap the conversation there, just any final thoughts on practical application that you want to leave folks with today?
Yeah, I think the two biggest things I think about are like establishing it in like an iterative nature. Start small and go from there. You can always, it's easy to add more things, but if you try to manage to 100 things, it's going to be really hard to do. So don't be afraid to start with a few metrics and then go from there. The other thing I think is really important if you are management and there can be the perception of coming down on high with goals is as much as you can. And I certainly haven't always done the best job of this, is involve the team as much as possible in that planning process, certainly for their goals, but then to the high level of the company as well. The more that you can involve a whole organization in the planning process, obviously you have to work inside of like realistic and logistical constraints. But the more that people can be part of agreeing to what they're going to be held accountable against, not only the better will they feel about it, but the more excited they'll be. And I think we've really seen that when we've involved people in that, people want to accomplish big and audacious things. And if you allow them to be part of that planning process, I think a lot of managers and leaders would be pleasantly surprised to see, how different individual contributors are maybe a little bit more aggressive than you might expect.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I agree with so much you've been sharing today, Jonathan. To wrap things up a little bit for listeners, talked about, when you look at the data and what you're trying to measure, look for ways that you can unify that data, look for ways that you can aggregate it and give a window into that to more people on the team, not 6 out of your 200 that have access to the data that's behind the walls, and make sure you put the proper context to it as you're rolling out any sort of goal setting program or system. Make sure that you iterate. You start small. I can echo this in the Sweetfish team. Last year, you and I were talking a little bit offline, Jonathan. We tried implementing 4 disciplines of execution. I think we probably fell into that dogma over framework a little bit. And right now we're rolling out OKRs to our leadership team before we start using the method to our whole team. So we're doing that iterate piece and then involving the team in that next phase of rollout. One thing I will say that we've been trying to do to keep that framework over dogma is, we've spent a lot of time in our leadership offsite setting our annual objectives. And we've also, I think it was James, our founder, was looking at, man, I really like the language around 4x4, 4 goals in 4 weeks, and almost using that language to replace key results. So we might have O's and 4x4s, but who cares? If it works for us, it'll work for us. So I can just see the realities of the things that you're saying and the advice that you're given and some of the things that we're going through. So Jonathan, if anybody listening to this has gotten some value like I have, what's the best way for them to reach out, stay connected with you, or follow up with you and your team, man?
Yeah, you can always check us out at yaguara.co. You can reach out to me directly, Jonathan at yaguara.co. And always happy to chat. We have lots of different ways on our site for you to get a hold of me or anyone else on the team. You can chat with us in real time. I am often the person responding through our live chat, so we're always easy to talk to.
You and me both, man. I love it. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
I hate it when podcasts incessantly ask their listeners for reviews, but I get why they do it. Because reviews are enormously helpful when you're trying to grow a podcast audience. So here's what we decided to do. If you leave a review for B2B Growth in Apple Podcasts and email me a screenshot of the review to james@sweetfishmedia.com, I'll send you a signed copy of my new book, Content-Based Networking, How to Instantly Connect with Anyone You Want to Know. We get a review, you get a free book. We both win.